So this film or the slide presentation concerns a unusual, very interesting, and not well-known monograph of Ibn Sina, Avicenna, on the topic of drugs that are specific to the heart. In fact, these are drugs that are meant to cure emotional problems, such as anxiety, excessive worry, and sadness. And they're based on the theory that the spirit, the pneuma, the ruh, which is responsible for these emotions, is housed in the heart. This treatise has actually been published twice. It was first published in 1937 in Istanbul by some Turkish scholars on the basis of quite a few manuscripts, all of them found in Turkish libraries. It was published again in 1984 in Damascus as part of a collection of small or minor medical works by Ibn Sina on the basis of 3 manuscripts, none of them used in the earlier edition, and this printing, this edition of 1984, does not take into account the manuscripts used in the first edition, and both of the editions leave out of the picture a number of Arabic manuscripts. This treatise was also translated into Latin, in fact, more than once, but the most important, most widespread version is the translation of Arnaldus of Villanova, which is appended to the printings of Avicenna's Canon, the incunabula printings of the Canon. The monograph Adwi al-Qalbiya, or cardiac drugs, was also translated into Hebrew twice. What I have here on the screen is simply a few pages from Moritz Steinschneider's classic work of over a century ago on the Hebräische Übersetzung des Mittelalters, the Hebrew translations of the Middle Ages, which is still the only guide to this sort of literature. And Steinschneider characterizes the 2 translations, lists some commentaries, and in the meanwhile, a few other manuscripts have come to light. The first and most important question that should be asked is, why didn't Ibn Sina take up this topic in his magisterial Canon fil-Tibb? It is the most important work of medicine from the 11th century till well into the Renaissance, really comprehensive and systematic survey and detailed instruction in medical theory and practice, pharmacology. Why did Ibn Sina decide to give this particular topic, these drugs that are aimed at repairing the spirit, the pneuma, the ruh in the heart, why weren't they included in his canon, which covers just about everything else that one can think of in the field of medicine? Well, in fact, Ibn Sina himself tells us in the canon that this particular topic will have to be dealt with in a different work, because the theoretical basis of the drugs that are aimed at repairing or restoring the spirit, the pneuma in the heart, is different from that of the medicine which is exhibited and explained and developed in the canon. As he says here, when someone combines his knowledge of medicine with his knowledge of the principles, that is, the principles of Aristotelian science rather than Galenic medicine, the principles of Aristotelian science that are more encompassing than those of medicine, he will derive benefit from it. But that cannot be dealt with in his canon, because his Canon fil-Tibb, his canon, is an extremely tightly organized, systematic book of medicine based on Galenic principles, and he's very, very careful not to stray from the theoretical framework and basis of Galenic medicine. So he himself has decided that this particular small little subfield of medicine has to be dealt with in a different treatise. And in fact, in his Shifa, his encyclopedic encyclopedic coverage of Aristotelian science, in the section on nafs, the anima, psychology, he again has a cross-reference here, which confirms what we've said so far, that the monograph on cardiac drugs is based on Aristotelian principles rather than Galenic ones, and therefore it has to be dealt with in a separate treatise and cannot be included in the canon. So here we are at the end, I think, of Book 4 of Kitab al-Nafs of the Shifa, and Ibn Sina says, after dealing about certain emotions, we have already provided in our medical books a discourse on the reasons why people with different natural dispositions, also taking into account their different states, have propensities for joy, sadness, anger, hatred, jealousy, tranquility, and so on. Something that treats of this in its detail and its attainment is not to be found in the writings of my predecessors. Read it there. And just to seal the fact that he's referring here to his monograph, the one this film is discussing, the cardiac drugs, his student, Jani, inserted into this part of Kitab al-Nafs some passages from al-Adwi al-Kalbiya. So there's no question that Ibn Sina here in Kitab al-Nafs of al-Shifa, his Aristotelian summa, is referring to al-Adwi al-Kalbiya, cardiac drugs, for someone who wants to read about how one treats emotional issues medically, pharmacologically. Now, the key theoretical difference between al-Adwi al-Kalbiya and the Canon, the reason why, as I've been saying all along, this is got to be dealt with in a separate treatise, is that the drugs, the medications that are discussed and presented in this monograph on cardiac drugs are aimed at treating the spirit, the ruh, and this is a concept which has some role in the Galenic medicine, which is the theoretical framework and underpinning of the Canon, but nowhere, but not of the kind that's needed for the type of detailed analysis that Ibn Sina wants to give here. In fact, it's the role of ruh, of spirit, of pneuma, which is very problematic from the point of view of Galenic medicine, is minimized, extremely minimized to the bare minimum, kept to the bare minimum in the Canon. He begins the Canon, which deals, of course, as Galenic medicine would, deals with the treating the body, the humors in particular, bringing the humors into balance, and the organs based on their humoral and other constitutions. And only when very necessary does he mention spirits. You see here that in a chapter in temperaments, he mentions that the source of life is the heart and the spirit, but really doesn't say anything at all about it, whereas in the Adwi al-Kalbiya, he has quite a bit to say about spirit. So to begin with, in al-Adwi al-Kalbiya, Ibn Sina tells us that the generation of spirit parallels that of the body. The body is made up of the coarser humors and vapors, and spirit from the purest portions, the safwa, of each. Like the bodily humors, the spirit is composed of the four elements, but its source is divine efflux, or divine overflow, faid ilahi. Now he then tells us that both the humors and the spirits organize themselves into units with their own particular temperament. Each humor has a different temperament, each spirit has a different temperament. The organs are numerous, but the first generated organ is one in number, and the generation of all the others is connected to its generation. However, there are different views among the schools, the madhahib, as to what this first generated organ is. And so I quote from my translation, "So also the spirits within us are many in number, and the spirit, which is the first of the spirits to be generated, according to the view of the most excellent scholars, is one. It is generated in the heart, and streams, flows, and penetrates into all of the chief organs. and when it settles in each one of them, it acquires there a particular temperament. Some a little bit harder than others, some are drier than others, and so on. The source for all of these faculties is, according to that scholar, of course to Aristotle, the heart, just as the source of the faculties of vision, hearing, taste, and the rest of it is, according to his opponent, namely Galen, the brain. Continuing, he tells us that spirit pulsates, daru, the same word that's used for the arterial motion, the pulse. Spirit pulsates in a manner similar to the celestial bodies. For this reason, it is judged to be a luminous substance, and for this reason, the visual spirit is said to be raised in light. For this reason also, the soul becomes excited when it sees light and distressed when in darkness. For the former resonates with its vehicle, while the latter is opposed to it. Now this analogy between the spirit, which is part of the makeup of the human body, the human biology, and some spirit that is celestial, is found in Aristotle, and it plays some role here. I mean, the fact that the spirit pulsates as a movement, of course the celestial bodies are a movement, they are luminous, it is luminous. In fact, he claims here that it's the movement which leads us to conclude that spirit is luminous. And then we have these ideas of sympathy, that because light is of the same nature or the same frequency as the soul, then light causes us to be happy, and being in darkness causes us distress. And he has again this verb vehicle, markov, which, as many of you know, is a key word in the Neoplatonic theory of pneuma. So there's a lot here that has roots, connections to Aristotle and to the Neoplatonists with regard to spirit. But the medical part, the therapeutics, is, as far as I can tell, totally original with Ibn Sina. So as I said, there is the roots of this notion of the spirit seem to go back at least to Galen in his book on De Placitis, harmonizing Hippocrates and Plato. Galen says the following: and if we must speak of the substance of the soul, we must say one of two things. We must say either that it is, as it were, bright and an ethereal body, a view to which the Stoics and Aristotle are carried in spite of themselves, as the logical consequences of the teachings. Or that is itself an incorporeal substance, and this body is its first vehicle, by means of which it establishes partnership with other bodies. We must say then that this pneuma itself extends through all the brain, and that by partnership with it, the optical pneuma becomes luminous. So, again, this is a dense passage in a book which was well known to the Arabic writing physicians, though the actual Arabic translation has not survived. We can't take away from this the idea that both the Stoics and Aristotle were sort of forced by the logic of their own systems to speak of pneuma or soul, and there's some confusion of whether pneuma is the soul or that we have pneuma and soul. With Avicenna, certainly we have both. With some Stoics we don't. That it is luminous and in motion, and I think that this sort of idea that Galen describes here is possibly the source, or describes the source from which Ibn Sina derived the notion that lies behind this treatise. So we hear that this monograph on cardiac drugs is unusual both from the point of view of medicine and from the point of view of philosophy. And this this idiosyncrasy comes out in the very different approaches taken to the treatise by the two extant Hebrew commentaries. There's an anonymous commentary in Oxford which sort of follows along with Ibn Sina and sort of enjoys the religious, or one would say spiritual flavor of this treatise. On the other hand, there is a commentary of Baruch ben Yaish, a Aristotelian philosopher of the 15th century who occasionally resists Ibn Sina when he sees that he's what he's writing in this book is not in line with what he said in the Canon, but he also helps. He helps me a lot as a sort of research assistant by identifying sources. He raises doubts with regard to some things Ibn Sina discusses here and tries to solve them. Now, moving on to therapy, here we have a list of exhilarants, mufarihat, and the different ways in which they bring joy to the person by repairing the pneuma in his heart. The pneuma, the vital pneuma, the ruh al-haywaniya, has degenerated, has darkened, has become thick, and that causes people to be sad and anxious and overly worrisome. Of course, sometimes it has to do not with some passing phenomenon, some passing malfunction, but it's an inborn disposition which makes it more difficult to deal with. Ibn Sina talks about this a lot in this treatise. But in any event, we have a series of drugs which can help. And Ibn Sina here lists the 9 ways in which these drugs can help cure the anxiety that's produced by a spirit that has become thick and dark. Some nurture the spirit, like drink, wine, which, as he says, is the elixir of joys, the magnet of happiness. Simply nurtures it. It feeds it. Some brighten it, like pearls, actually bringing in light. I mean, you actually consume, you eat pearls and jewels and other substances that are said to produce light, and they brighten the spirit, and that causes joy, that relieves anxiety. Some tighten the composition, increase the tension, the tonus of the pneuma, and that is also important for maintaining good emotional health. Some bring it into balance. The way one treats humoral disorders, because there is, like I said, for Ibn Sina at least, the emphasis of the Platonist pneuma, like the humors, is composed of the 4 elements and has a certain temperament, needs to be in balance. And so the same way that one treats ills of the body by bringing the elements of the humors into balance, one does the same thing for the humors, for the spirit. Strengthens the temperament using herbs and aromatics. Aromatics are particularly helpful here because pneuma is very receptive to vapors. Vapors are very effective in treating, in interacting with the pneuma and repairing its material constitution. It also shakes off the vapors of black bile, other sort of the harmful vapors rising up from black bile. Black bile, of course, being the source of melancholy, and some drugs will chase away these bad vapors. Some drugs combine several of the above, and some have what is called a chasiya, Hebrew skula, a specific, as they call it, an occult property. These are medical substances which are observed to have certain properties. The medical science of their time, which felt it could explain why pearls or myrobalan or other things have their therapeutic effect. They can't explain why these things work, but they observe to work. And some material medica, combine several of these. I conclude by talking about, I think, the first in the alphabetical listing of these medical substances, and which Ibn Sina gives a fairly detailed account of how it acts. That is silk, or silk cocoons. It's both an exhilarant, something that brings about joy, and an illuminant, something that brightens the spirit and again increases joy. So here I am reading from my translation of Ibn Sina's description of the properties of silk. It's one of the strong exhilarants. The best sort is raw, but cooked silk cocoons may be used, especially if not been dyed. It's hot and dry in the first degree. This is the way medicinal science, pharmacological materials were always, characterized and measured at the time. For that reason, it has the properties of desiccation because it's hot and dry, it dries out, and stypsis, stopping bleeding, it stops bleeding. And it possesses brilliance and translucence. In other words, for pneuma to be in the position or in the situation in which one can experience joy, there must be light, so we need brilliance, and the light must be able to pass as freely through it as possible, so we need the translucence as well. Now, silk has a specific property, the chasiya, of exhilarating the heart and strengthening it, working in particular to soften it, again, so that the spirit can spread out as much as possible. It thus expands the pneuma, making it translucent, because the more it spreads itself thin, the more light can pass through it, causing it to grow and illuminating it. It is not specific to one spirit rather than the other. There are at least three main spirits, one in the heart, one centered in the brain, one in the liver, and then different subcategories of each, or one state rather than another. Instead, is appropriate for every substance of pneuma. So this is really a wide-ranging drug when it comes to treating the spirits that are in the bodies. It's helpful for all the different types of spirit that are in the body. And finally, so you can see that these things are still in practice. The Ibn Sina's treatise was translated into several languages in Central Asia, Persian, Urdu, and maybe Uzbek, I'm not quite sure. And it's still sold by those who practice Unani medicine. So you have this thing, Khamira Abrasham, Abrasham being this Ibrisum, the silk, and you see here from the advertisement they've taken from the internet, an age-old pharmacopoeia formulation, a combination of refreshing and nutritious herbs, fruits, and minerals, including silver foils. Silver is also mentioned by Ibn Sina in this treatise, and provides nourishment to the heart. Its main active ingredient is silk cocoon, and is a proven exhilarant and cardiac tonic. So this same medicine is still being applied today, and I'm not making any recommendation for or against, but this is, again, an interesting, unusual treatise. And by the way, for someone who was not at all modest about his achievements, Ibn Sina is very laid back when it comes to this treatise, which is highly original and very, very well organized. Well, anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this talk, and if you did, you can perhaps give a like to the video. Thank you.